Can you imagine having to learn to be an adult all over again, but in a truly sped up version? Hey guys, thanks so much for clicking on the video. This is my review for Interview with the Vampire. This is episode 2. You know what? And I don't even know how many episodes there's actually going to be of this. Um, I don't know where we're actually going, but I'm here for it. I'm here for the ride. This episode was actually called After the Phantoms of Your Former Self. And it truly was that. This whole episode really did center around Louis learning and being introduced to the new Louis and what that all really means, what it all encompasses. Um, the supernatural side as well as just in general. Um, and they actually didn't even get down into a lot of the threats of actually being a vampire. The sunlight thing was the very first thing, naturally. Um, After all of the killing and all of that kind of carrying on, it was like a sped up track of disposing of the bodies, keeping your identity. You can't, you're having to learn. You can't just kill people because, just normal people. They have families and somebody's going to be looking for them. That you learn to hunt, basically. Learn to hunt, learn who you're hunting, learn why and why not. All of those things he had to do, as well as he actually, in the midst of them getting rid of the bodies, because they have to hide the bodies of the 2 priests that actually were extinguished, if you will, in the last episode. So they're dragging them through the cemetery and all of this. And as this is going on, Louis' self is actually dying, which is something which is different here, because generally when you see in a vampire movie, let's see, I've seen many, when you're dying, it's literally like a death. So you're not moving around. Louis like moving around and following behind Lestat and carrying on. That's the first I've ever seen of that. Usually, like, you're on the floor and you're going through, but he's like throwing up and he's just doing all these things, sort of like a junkie getting clean kind of thing. But he's doing it, and it's really, like I said, it's at an accelerated pace. Um, Very, very interesting. So we see all of that, and then we see it all come to light. We see it all unfold, the change of the eyes, and how far into things you could actually see, and how you could actually hear things, um and that being really heightened. And I'll tell you a little story, which is so strange. I don't know if I might have done it. I might have actually told this, but going through chemotherapy, when I went through chemotherapy, this is the one thing that I could actually put this to. When Lestat was telling him, like, you got to blank out all the sounds. You have to blank out the sounds, and then you have to zoom in. That's when he was like trying to teach him how to focus. Okay. And the closest thing that I could actually put to that is when I went through chemo. When you go through chemo, you lose everything. Like, you lose all hair, all body hair. Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I did. You lose all your eyebrows, you lose all that. And 2 things that I never thought about is that each and every person, you actually have hair that's inside your nose as well as in your ears now. And you never think about it. The only time you actually think about that is when you see like old people, like people that's just old and just unkept, and you start seeing them with hair growing out their ear. And all. But everybody actually has hair in there. And what it does in your ears, it compresses the sounds and all of that stuff. And in your nose, it actually, the hair is there as a guard for things blowing up your nose, such as like this whole COVID thing. you have that hair in your nose, that's like an extra layer of protection from different things coming and just blowing into your nose, infection and stuff like that. Um, you're so susceptible to everything, and you never really think about all that stuff. So when I was going through chemo, one of the strangest things is that the whatever hair was inside my ear that just totally gone. And it used to drive me crazy because remember, I started chemo in the midst of the summer. Okay. So in the midst of the summer, I have my naturally I have my central air unit. And my central air unit is quiet. It's quiet. But that the you could literally hear everything. There was nothing to really compress the sounds. I literally had to learn to adjust myself to the sounds because the sound would drive you nuts. Like you just never give it any thought. Like, are you kidding me? It was sort of like if you ever watched the Bionic Man or the Bionic Woman, the Bionic Woman, she had the ear. So in her ear, like when the ear wasn't working right, it would like drive her crazy. I went through that for months and months and months. When the summer went away, the furnace, it was not as bad as the central air, but I had to learn to literally blank out the central air. So I said all that to just say this. That was just what came to mind for me personally when I was seeing these things of Louis trying to learn how to focus on what sound you're trying to get when you're actually getting all of them. So yeah, I kind of went through that. So that was really, really interesting. Um, yeah. So why I decided to share that with you, I don't know. I just did because I just wanted to. And that's what I do here. But that's what came to mind. So that's why I shared it. So if you got something out of it, great. If you didn't get anything out of it, just forget I ever said it. Okay. But anyway, that's what came to mind for me. I was like, I knew how aggravating that was. I'm like, I could just imagine being even more heightened than that. That was like really crazy. But anyway, so all of that's going on. He got the lesson. We live off of the blood of the living, not the blood of the dead. Because as the body's dying, as they were getting rid of the bodies, he was getting ready to try to drink some blood because, of course, the thirst is, very prominent in them all the time. So he had to tell him, no, shoo away, leave these bodies alone. He said, because if you drink from the dead, blood of the dead can pull you down into death with it. So he had to learn all that. You drink warm blood, you don't drink cold blood, Louis. Yeah. And then we seen him literally teaching them to hunt. There was this whole little situation where they went into a bar, and of course, the heart wants what the heart wants, and the body wants what the body wants. And remember, there's a whole, even all your sexuality is very heightened. So of course, the prettiest little thing in the bar was this little sailor guy, and he was fixated on him. And he's like, he's a no. He's a no. He's a sailor. Like, are you kidding? Of course, somebody will know he's gone. He showed him, no, there was this little salesman, little mousy salesman. And you could see him, just going through the struggle of trying to concentrate on what the man was saying, though he didn't give a shit about what the man was talking about. He just wanted to bite him, all that stuff. So it was interesting to see him have to go. It was like a child in an accelerated class. Then the how to sleep. I said, oh, here we go again, honey. When he first shows him where he sleeps and all of this. And he's like, okay, well, eventually you'll get your own coffin because there was only one. He's like, I'm not sleeping in there. And of course, their Lestat got him wrapped around his little finger, honey, and they got that little thing going on for each other. So he went and took off all his clothes. This was after Louis had did his whole thing of, I'm going home. I'm going home. I got to go home. And he let him do it. I said, see, again, Louis is very sadistic. He let him barge out and leave and go into the sunlight and get all burned up. He's like, I probably should have told you about that. You think? I told you I can't stand Lestat. Lestat, he has a very sadistic way of doing things. He's just he likes to inflict pain and different things like that. He gets off on it. But of course, Louis ended up coming back and everything, and he gets naked and he goes and gets his little pale self into the coffee and say, you could be on top. I said, oh, here we go. Here we go. I said, child, y'all are doing the most, honey. But that I guess that made it all better, baby. So I'm gonna get on top of you. Okay. All right. Well, I'll go on and get on in there. Better you than me, bud. But yeah, so that's how he eased him into it, honey. Get on top of me, honey. That's how he eased him into the getting in the coffin situation. And eventually he did get his own coffin. I said, well, look at that. And I don't know if any of you noticed. Did you notice like his coffin was solid black and it wasn't as nice as his? It wasn't a cheap coffin, but it wasn't as nice and lavish as his. I said, oh, is that a his and hers, honey? But okay, a mess. Anyway, but that's what he was saying. It was just too many firsts. He's like death and killing. My first death, my first, first time dying, my first time killing, my first time coming out. And then you got David or Daniel. Why do I always want to call him David? Daniel. Daniel's doing the interview. We're going back and forth from real time, back into the story. And Daniel's still like real snap with his comments. And he's like, yeah, it still seems a little bit like the white master of the black student. I said, yeah, Daniel, I'm with you. It really feels that way. It feels that way. And then there's still an internal power struggle between Daniel and Louis in real time. Louis apologizes to Daniel for blowing up on him. Remember he blew up on him a little bit at the end of the last episode. And he told him, he said, I'm sorry, that won't happen again. And he says, the servants were telling him, Louis will actually join you around the 7th round of dinner. And they're like, he's like, 7th round? What? Yeah, baby, y'all got rich people problems, honey. 7 rounds, baby. So he said, so wait a minute. So how do you, what do you do? Why did you choose to work for him? Y'all got something going on? Are you that way? What's going on? Did you have to sign an NDA? And the little guy was like, you're not here to interview me. You don't interview me. Don't do me. And he told me, he said, I serve a God, and it's a privilege to do so. I said, oh, girl, she can drink the Kool-Aid. I said, okay, Louis. Louis is fine, but I don't know about all that right there. That's a mess. Anyway, so they're going back and forth. Of course, Daniel's eating all of these delectables, honey. And Louis drinking blood down the other end of the table. Then there comes this point where he's eating an entree and Louis is, see, they both are doing, you can see where in real time, Louis has picked up some of the sadistic nature of Lestat. He's changed. He's telling a story, but he's also letting Daniel know that he's changed. Like he doesn't do things like a traditional vampire. And he has this varmint. I don't know what that was, but it was still living, of course. Which told the story. We know, if you've seen this before, Louis doesn't. There became a time where Louis used to eat rats, as opposed to he would bite rats and stuff, little small animals, instead of bite people. He wouldn't do it. That was the thing that made Louis special. Louis still had there was still mortality to him. He just was not just immortal. He still had value. He still saw value in human life. So that's what always made Louis different. And he used to eat like small, like I said, rats and stuff. But whatever this thing was, I don't know what that thing was, but it was some type of varmint, and he was screaming and making all kind of noise. But he was screwing with Daniel, really, because Daniel's saying something to him. He said, well, my thing is, Do you ever finesse or make calm the lamb before you eat it? And as he's doing this, you see him caressing and finessing this, whatever this thing is, until it stopped screaming, and it had gotten very calm with him. And then he took it and and he bit it, and he sucked the blood out of it, and then he said, I am a killer. So don't get it confused. Whatever it is, I do what I do, how I do it. But I am a hunter. I am predatory. You know what? I this is what I do. Don't play with me. It's like, oh Louie. But I don't know what that was you was biting on, honey, but it was furry and it was terrible. It was making terrible noise, honey, before you calmed it down. And then after you got it, honey, I was like, oh, okay. So Daniel hanging in there, you know, it ain't grossing totally out. He's still eating and carrying on. Then they had this whole little scene where they end up doing like the lad. He said, you know, I've held on to my humanity. I try, you know. He said, I always, you know, once a month or so, I'll I'll try to eat a human dish. And you know, that generally makes vampires sick. And he says, well, what does it taste like? He said, like most human food, tastes like paste or chalk. I said, oh, ooh, okay. Again, I know the feeling, honey. Crazy. When I was on chemo, all pasta. I love pasta. Lasagna is my favorite meal of all time. All pasta for the whole time I was on chemo tasted like I was just biting into a stick of butter. It didn't matter what type of sauce was on it. It didn't matter how it was prepared. No matter how much garlic was it. It just pasta literally tastes like biting into a stick of butter. So I get it, Louis. Anyway, a mess, but he does it anyway just to keep attached to his humanity. I said, okay, whatever little thread he has left. So all of that going on. Learning the mind reading situation was rough, but then finding out that Lestat can no longer read his mind. That, you know, vampires can't read each other's minds. They read humans' minds. So that was interesting. Um, then there's the thing that come up about visiting the family. So they actually go to this dinner party that was actually happening. He hadn't seen the mother in months, you know, and the mother, she's still on her petty. She's like sitting there, and he didn't read her mind, and in her mind, all this gay stuff is coming up, and she's like, he's getting his nails done, and you know, that's the thing. If you are part of LGBTQIA, everything is always, if you find a partner, the family tends to do, the black families do, they tend to put everything on the partner. It's always their fault. You know, they don't like that person. It ain't you. It ain't you. Or you just going through something. But they will tend to not like whoever that is you're interested in. It's definitely got to be their fault, which is just so crazy because it's like they are somebody's child too. And that same thing and those same feelings you having are probably the same feelings that's going on over at their house. But it's even like with heterosexuals, generally, you know, when the first boyfriend or first girlfriend come through, yeah, your parents don't be liking them, child. Like that person's trying to lure you into doing something. Meanwhile, you just as hot underneath your belt buckle as they is. That's kind of what Mama was going through. Mama, she ain't like, oh, she read Lestat. She said, why don't you take your overdressed self and go on out to the party and enjoy yourself? Which was a nice way of saying, get the hell up out my face, honey. You know, my son is attached at the hip to you, and I can't get rid of you. Get the hell on up out of my face. I was like, oh, all right, honey. So then he ends up running into the sister, finds out, and you know, he can hear all these heartbeats. He's like, you're pregnant. Then he told her, and it's twins. I said, oh. She made him take his glasses off, so she ended up seeing his eyes. She says, your eyes, you look happy and whatever and whatnot and well, and Girl, no, it's not that at all, honey. But she's like, I'm fine. She loves him. The sister definitely has that unconditional love. Mama, not so much. Poor Paul, we lost poor Paul. So all of that goes on. That's that. So then we jump forward. We got this whole situation where Louis is dealing with like businessmen. He has this great idea for this club. There was one of the guys that actually worked for him. He was going to front things through him because he was a white gentleman and that kind of thing. And of course, the stat was like, he's just trying to cheat you, and all that. So that whole thing was what it was. It just nothing had actually changed for real. You still were being treated as less than when you were literally the power brain behind these things, because they were basically trying to create a club better than the old brothel. So he was creating like the first club, and there was this whole thing. It was the invention basically of fire escapes. Okay, and he gave it the name Fire Escape, and the guy was like, "Oh, you a smart, insightful little Negro. This, that, thing, the other. All these little snack comments that got up underneath. It got to a point where that stuff started to get up under Louis' skin. Now Louis is somebody different. Louis actually has powers and he has strength that he didn't have before. Well, baby, he ended up after the little businessman down talked him and talked all smart and cute to him, and then went on. He killed him, honey. He tore his ass up. Tore his ass up. He was going to be an investor, and he flew down that doggone street, baby, and got him and tore his ass up. He peeing on the property. I'm like, ignorant. Tore him up. Him and Lestat got into it. He's like, what are you doing? Like, you killing people at your own business site? Like, are you kidding? It's like, you got to learn how to control your impulses and your urges. You have to. And they're arguing. He wants to tell him, I'm not your slave. He's like, I'm not saying that. He said, but that's kind of how it feels. Like I'm your slave. I'm not. So they wasn't speaking. Then later on that night, honey, they had this whole lovers quarrel. They in their two little coffins, honey, and then they have a little chat. And baby, he over there batting his eyelashes and carrying on. He said, I want to own the club myself. And he's like, well, how can I deny you that? And he's looking at him and gonna say, how can I even tell you no? And he gonna grin. I said, child, y'all in this little love affair y'all got going on. I get you. But your boyfriend is sick in his head, honey, but that's okay. So he got what he wanted naturally. He's learning. He's learning how to do what it is he do, and he knows how to. Though Lestat has him wrapped up, he also has Lestat wrapped up. Lestat is totally in love with him and has always been, but it's his version of love, okay? But he took care of these black folks that work for. They had better pay rather, better accommodations. And they were living the life. And he said he made so much money that he basically could have retired way. He would have been way early in his retirement. By this time, a lot of time had gone by. He hasn't been home at all. So he goes to his sister's house. At this time, she's had the twins, and she also has another baby. She got the twins, and then she has a newborn. And she makes him hold the baby, and it just was this whole scene where he was so, that's the thing too. The younger, the sweeter the blood or something like that. Like it's eating babies and stuff. It's really, really bad, but it's really very like alluring to them. Because again, the heartbeat is faster and it's just like better. But he was so tempted to eat his nephew, pretty little baby. And I was like, oh God, stop, honey. So I was like getting mad, of course. I was getting it, and my feelings getting irritated about the baby. And then the sister, she not clocking it. She had to run upstairs because something was going with the twins, and she left him there with the baby. He goes running. So now we're going in and out from the conversation with Daniel to him and this trying to fight this urge with the baby. And I mean, he was like so enthralled and wanting to eat this baby till he's sitting there, and then the fangs came down and even had like drool come down. But I was looking at him and I was like, what is child? stop it. Like, what is going on? And in the midst of it, Daniel kept asking him, so did you eat the baby? And, Daniel's real, staunch. Did you eat the baby? And he keep trying to tell the story in this long, drawn out version. And he's basically saying, like, this happened and that happened. And he's like, did you eat the baby? He didn't eat the baby. He literally left the baby on the floor. The baby was crying, and he ran out and left. And he basically hadn't seen his family at all. He was back at the house with Louis, with Lestat. And Lestat's like, like it's no big deal. He's like, it is my nephew. Like, I almost ate my nephew. Like, are you kidding? So, he cried, had a little blood running down. And he just was, that was like a shock to the humanity. Like, I'm losing it. And this is not cool. So, all that going on. And of course, Lestat had to think of something to take his mind off of it. He tells him, he says, listen. He said, maybe we'll go on a holiday. We'll go on a holiday. Maybe we'll go to Rome. He's like, really? Just go to Rome? He's like, oh, anything could be accomplished. He said, what are we going to do? Find somebody to be able to carry the coffins in, and then we're going to eat them on that, kill them before we come back. He's like, well, yeah. That was like, oh my goodness. Just a mess. And then switch back to real time when he kept on ducking and dodging the conversation about eating the baby, because she was ashamed of that. Because I was like, please don't tell me you ate this baby. But he was ashamed of the whole thing. The fact that he wanted to eat his nephew, it just was shameful. We're protectors of our younger family members. We won't eat them, child. So he had actually talked about like things that's going on in real time. Like he's about like the pandemic. He's saying, he says, what I can hear, it stretches out very, very far. There are many, many of us in all different areas. And he says, I go out onto my balcony and I hear the plans that are being made. And then he made reference to the pandemic and said it's being called a great conversion, which is, of course, that's all like conspiracy theory, that these things are for chemical warfare. That's basically what he was confirming. And I was like, oh, that was interesting that y'all threw that right on in there. Then he also showed like how showing basically as they're going through how he feeds, how he eats, everything, how he nourishes and stuff himself. And that's what he told me. He says, I don't kill anymore. I don't do that anymore. When he found himself, this humanity slipping away, I don't kill anymore. And that's what he showed, eating different things and munching on different things. And he was saying something about a farm. And so, what is this farm? And you got like these kind of like rave folk. They're LGBTQIA folk, and they rave and that kind of thing. But they come on up, and it's a whole big thing, and they're fans, and they come up and they voluntarily get fed upon. And he had this little cute little guy, just all muscular, and had his little tats and all that. And he fed off of him, and the guy's sitting there, and he's like, okay. And then I think Louis drank a little too much, and he was trying to leave, and he was like falling out. I was like, I laughed at him real good. I was like, that's what you get. But he doesn't kill him. And he called for the people to come and get him. He just sucked up a little bit too much of his blood, child. It was too good to him, honey. He fell out on the floor. He was a big old muscular thing that fell on out on the floor. I said, shout us what you get anyway. People always try to be the part of something. Everybody want to be somebody's fan, honey. Fangirling. I fell out in the hall, honey, with them 2 knots on your neck, goofball. Anyway, so then we end up seeing Lestat was saying, I've really been lapsed on my whole courtship of you and really dating you and showing you love. And that's what he was telling me. He said, some about his family, and he told him, I'm your family. I am your family. I'm your family, and I love you and whatever. He's like, whatever. So they end up going to this opera. And this is when we found out that Lestat's weakness. Lestat loves music, and he throws himself into it, and he really gets lost in music. And they go, and he said the only way that they can actually do it, because they said I got a brand new tux that's made and all of that. But of course, you can't just bust out. We're just gonna be on this little gay date, and then you're black and I'm white, and you know. So he had to actually go through, and then we see this whole racism thing again, and this pretending, and this plan, and this code switching, where he's the only way that they can really do it. He pretends to be his valet. He's checking his code, and he's doing all this. He's basically the white owner and the black slave, basically. And then he will let him sit down after the first act begins, and all of this. And he was, saying how, you go through emotions, but how angry it would make him inside. And he's like, but it's like it was what it was. He said he was my maker, he was my murderer, he was my lover, and he was my mate. And there was a whole part of me that basically worshiped him. And this is like 6 years into this. They've been at this for like 6 years. But then we go into, like I said, this love of this music. And then we see the sadistic nature on top of the narcissism. There is the soprano. Naturally, the soprano is always the star of the opera. And there was a tenor. There's a top level tenor, and he just was off. Like he wasn't on. And Lestat was so aggravated. He was like picking people up just anywhere and letting them sing. He got real mad, real mad. And he said, he could tell in the face, like, oh, here we go. And he's like, wow, why does it have to be like that? He said, well, yeah, exactly. Why does it have to be like that? And he said, I could see in his face. I knew the hunt was on. So after the show, he's now back to, now you're the servant, and he's running around, and he's schmoozing with the folk, and basically luring the tenor. He ends up luring them back to the house. They're talking. He sits over there for basically a half hour, and he is showing the tenor everything he did wrong. Everything he did wrong. And he's saying, I'm watching him as he literally breaks this man down, like kills his self-confidence and all of these things. And then he tells him, this is the way. He says, see, he's doing on the piano. It's here, here, here. And the guy's trying to sing the note, and he's like, wrong. I said, who even let somebody you don't even know take you down that road? Like, that was just a mess. But he was just sadistic. He literally took solace in breaking him. And then he told him, said, why I know that you are doing it wrong, and that's not what the composer actually wanted for this piece. He's like, huh? He says, I know it because I was there when he wrote it. And he took 2 fingernails, baby, and juked them up over in here where your vocal cords are. Because most people actually think your vocal cords are here, and they're not. They're actually over here. And he juked them, honey, and his vocal cords to where it punctured him just enough where he couldn't scream out for help. And he was still able to breathe somewhat, but he was bleeding out slowly. I said, oh, just sadistic. And literally, and then he takes him and going to treat him, going to coddle him. So come on, so you can come on over here and die on the couch. I said, oh my God. So this is what then him and Louis get started, because Louis is like, why do you have to do this? Why do you like to do this? And he's like, why not? And then they're like having it back and forth or whatever. And it was like, oh, that was terrible. But then he's over there, and then he sits, and then Louis like, and even though like I'm arguing with him, I don't really like what's going on. He's so in my brain, and I'm so in love with him, and I worship him so much that I find myself literally, now I'm getting off a little bit watching this as it's going on, and knowing that there's a part of me that just doesn't like it, but I'm just so into him that I just can't help myself. And he says, and we for hours, we drained the tenor. He said, because he sat there for a minute, sadistic himself, and read his mind. You know how they say when you're dying and your life flashes in front of your eyes? Is basically what the tenor had going on. He's halfway in a trance, and his life is flashing in front of his eyes. And Louis sitting there looking gorgeous, honey, with them eyes, honey, and basically reading all the thoughts and like literally seeing the man, seeing the visual pictures of the man as a little boy, being with his dad, actually learning how to sing, actually being in school little plays, all of that. I'm like, you just as nasty and sadistic yourself, knowing that y'all killing this man and you're doing this. Why? Just can't help yourself because you all messed up in the fray with the bull crap. And then they got on there and they got on either side of the man. And now it was sadistic, but it was really, really sexy at the same time. It was giving this whole little menage, honey. I said, oh my. Hey, but there was one, Louis was on one side. Um, Louis was on one side of man. They're sitting on the couch. Louis on one side of him and Lestat's on the other side of him, and they're both draining him. And Lestat is steady rubbing in Louis' hair. I said, oh, this is child stop, honey. It was a bit too much. It was a bit too much. Don't judge me. Anyway, let's move on. But that was what was given. So I'm gonna flip on back to too much sharing. Okay, so we go on to real time. Now they having this dessert, basically, okay? Having this dessert, and in the midst of having a dessert, the story has unfolded in a way where I noticed Daniel's hard edge has kind of lifted some. Like he's like, okay, because first he's saying stuff like the readers ain't all gonna buy that, you know, and that kind of thing. He is softened to Louis and what Louis' struggles are. And now he's tapped in and they're literally taking the story. And now it's just man for man listening to, oh man, wow, this is what happened to you. And this is where they are. This is where they're going. So it's not, he's becoming wrapped and entangled in the interview with this vampire. And he actually says, do you know what this dessert is called? He says, that's what he asked him. What does it taste like to you? And he told him it tastes like most human food. It tastes like paste and chalk. And he says, this is the dessert that I had when I got engaged to my first wife. And, you know, and now he's shared, again, this is something that naturally, you know, Louis could actually see it. He could see it. He could read his mind. He could actually see that was a happy time. And he said, that's when I first got off the drugs. And now at this point, it's two men sharing. They're sharing. And there's, you know, the gates are coming down. So I said, this is good and bad at the same time because you want to be very careful, Daniel. I mean, he's different, but he's still a little primal. I mean, you see what he did to that, whatever that rodent was. But I was like, okay, Louis, all right. But yeah, so it softened the mood. I said, we get ready to go into some real stuff here. And this is where this episode ended. Excellent, excellent episode. Again, this whole homoerotic thing going on, child, it's a lot at times. Some of it I could actually, I could, yeah, but some of it is a bit too much. The killing part is like, but just the whole, I said, ooh, the little scene on the couch took me out. I'm done. I'm gone. Too much information. All right, y'all. I'm out of here. I'll see you all on the next episode. Good night. Good night.